Tonight is a continuation of chapter 17, lesson 23. As we studied last week, we talked about verses 1 through 7. We talked about the mystical Babylon, or the harlot church, the religious system. And tonight we will go into the identity of the scarlet colored beast that the harlot is riding on or sitting on. But we can't, as I said last week, that we cannot separate last week's lesson from this week, because last week we had to talk about part of this week's lesson, and this week we'll have to refer back to last week. So we're still talking about actually the entire chapter of 17. But as we identified the harlot and the religious system last week, we talked about the angel that came, the messenger angel, which had one of the seven vials, and spoke to John and told him that I'll show you the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. And of course we learned that the many waters are peoples and a great multitude. And she's not actually setting upon water such as the Mediterranean or the Atlantic or Pacific or a body of water, but this represents that she has power or authority or influence over many people. And then he talked about her dominion and how that she had power and dominion over many people. And he talked about in the third verse, he said, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman set upon a scarlet-colored beast, having full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of the abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carried her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. And so this is where we are tonight, is when the angel spoke with John and said, Why did you marvel? Or why, he said, wherefore didst thou marvel? Or why did you marvel? I'm sure that this was something to marvel at when he saw this great harlot, this great religious system. But he said, Why did you marvel? He said, I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carried her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, as I've told you before, that I believe that John more or less recapped some of the things that we've studied before concerning the heads and the 7 heads and the 10 horns. But he had to do this in order to explain this harlot or this religious system that we're studying about. And in lesson 21, we saw the 7th and the last vial of the wrath of God poured out upon the earth. This resulted in a series of catastrophes on the earth. The sinful cities of this earth crumbled to the ground, and many other things happened. And in lesson 22 and also 23, this lesson, we're studying chapter 17, which is a parenthetical passage or parenthetical chapter that John inserted here to give us the necessary information for us to understand the remaining part of the revelation that is to come. So after chapter 17, we will go back into the consecutive order in chapter 18 and continue on with the revelation. But we need to understand this before we can continue. And so we've considered the identity of the great whore, and in this lesson we'll study the scarlet-colored beast that she sits upon and the meaning of the 7 heads and the 10 horns of the beast. And so the identity of the scarlet-colored beast, and we look in Revelation 17:3, which I just read, said that the woman sat upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now there are many people that confuse this beast with the dragon of Revelation 12. If you remember in Revelation chapter 12, we studied about the sun-clothed woman that was travailing in birth, that was going to bring forth the man-child, and the dragon stood before her waiting to devour the man-child as soon as it was born. But he was defeated in the fact that as soon as the man-child was born, that he was immediately caught up unto God into heaven. And then others think that this beast that we're talking about here is the same beast that we talked about in chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, where he saw the beast rise up out of the sea. This was the rise of the Antichrist because of their resemblance. However, this is not the beast either that we studied about in chapter 13, that we saw rise up among the people who we refer to as the false prophet. And so we will talk about this beast. And if you remember, I believe the 4th chapter, we talked about the 24 elders that stood before the throne of God, and there were 4 beasts before God, and those beasts that we talked about were there before the throne of God, and we referred to them from the original Greek as being the Zoa, or the living creatures. And these other beasts that we study about derived from the Greek word therion, which means a wild, ferocious, untamed animal. And so there's much difference between the beast, or the Zoa, which are the living creatures, which are cherubims, which worship before God, which herald and draw attention to God, and the beast that we're studying about now as being the wild, ferocious, untamed beast or untamed animals, and that's the only way that John could describe these beasts as being wild and ferocious, untamed, much like the wild animals of that day. But when we look at this beast tonight, at this point in our studies, we will see that as we study this a little bit closer, that we will understand that this is the beast that's out of the abyss. Some pronounce this abyss, some pronounce it abyss. It doesn't really matter how it is pronounced, but this is the beast that we have studied about that came out of the abyss, the spirit, the demonic spirit that came into the Antichrist and used the Antichrist, because I believe that I've explained before that spirits do not have bodies, and therefore they're looking for a means of expression. And so when the evil spirits, there are spirits in this world today, there are evil spirits all around us, and they are looking for a means of expression. Now, this is very contrary to the 20th century teaching. People don't like for you to admit that the devil is real. They don't like for you to admit that there are evil spirits in the world today. But there are people that are absolutely and utterly possessed by these spirits, and they're doing the bidding of Satan. They don't know it, however. They don't realize what is causing them to do these things. But when we study, we need to understand, it is important for us to understand that Satan has an organized army of angels on this earth that constantly war against the program of God on this earth. And you can read in Ephesians where he talks about the principalities of the air. You can read in Romans 8 and 38, Romans 8, 38 and 39. This is one of my favorite verses of Scripture, and if I had time, I'd probably just stop and preach about this a little bit. For in Romans 8:38, he said, "For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor powers, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord." What he was talking about were the evil influences that are in this world. Satan is a deceiver. I've explained that quite well a few times in this series of lessons, that Satan is a deceiver. The Bible said that he is walking about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And therefore the Bible tells us to watch and pray that you enter not into temptation. And so as we live for God and pray and seek God, that I believe that the Lord will keep us from the evil powers in this world today. He will lead us by his Spirit. And the Bible said, "For as many as are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God." And so I believe today that we must be led by the Spirit of God. I believe 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We must be yielded vessels in the hands of God and ask God to lead us, direct us, and to help us to do his will. And so Satan has an army which is an organized army that will do his bidding. And they constantly war against the program of God. We find in Ephesians chapter 6, Romans chapter 8, and Colossians chapter 1. And the scarlet-colored beast actually symbolizes a mighty angel of Satan who dwelt on the earth in time past, but who is now confined in the abyss. You will find this in Revelation 11 and 7. And we studied about this a few lessons ago. And he will be loosed upon the earth in the time of the kingdom of the Antichrist, and also called the time or the kingdom of the Antichrist will also be called the revived Grecian Empire. In Daniel chapter 10 and 20, he refers to this satanic angel as the Prince of Grecia. The following things that we're going to study here should help us to understand this. And in the Bible there are numerous passages showing the operation of satanic powers over the different kingdoms of the world in attempts to thwart God's eternal purpose in the earth, or to hinder the cause of Christ in the earth today, or the cause concerning Israel. And also we have the record of God's angelic forces against these satanic powers in carrying out his purpose in the earth. Now, what I'm saying here is that there are evil influences, there are evil spirits in the world today, but at the same time, there are angelic beings, or there are angels that are present with us at all times. I like what David tells us. He said, "For the angel of the Lord encampeth about them that fear him, and delivereth them." I believe that the angel of the Lord is with us day by day, and no matter what we're doing, where we are, and I don't know so much that each of us have a certain guardian angel that will go with us all the time. It's possible. I don't know that. But I do know that the angel of the Lord encampeth about them that fear him, and delivereth them. And so I believe that the angels of the Lord are with us when we're driving down the road in our automobile. And many times we have seen the results of the angel or the hand of the Lord being with us in near accidents and in things that we look back and we wonder how that we got by, and we can only say that there was someone else with me, or otherwise I may not be here today. I look back in my past life and in my younger days especially, and I've had close calls. I have come near to having automobile accidents, and I've many times at night when I was driving down the road, I would go to sleep. I would run off the road on the opposite side of the road, going down off of the pavement, down the ditch, and for some reason I would wake up just in time to pull the car back up on the roadway just before I would hit a bridge abutment. Now, there are some things that you cannot really explain unless you can just say that I believe that God was with me and He wasn't through with me yet, and so I am still here. And this has happened several times in my life, and I can see that God has been with me and delivered me. So there are angelic beings, there are angels around us, and the evil spirits, the evil influences, or the demon spirits that are in this earth are continually warring against the good spirits or the angels of God, and I believe that they're continually warring over you as an individual. The Bible tells us that Jesus spoke to Peter, and He says, Peter, He said, Satan has desired to have you that he may sift you, but He said that I have prayed for you that you will be delivered. So I believe that Jesus is watching out for us, and the angels are with us, and I have prayed many times and asked the Lord to just send His angels into our midst. And I prayed like this sometimes. I say, Lord, let the angels sit on every pew in this building. Let them walk up and down the aisles of this church building. Let them tread the rooftops of this building. I believe that angels are real, and I believe that they are here in our midst, and I believe that they are to lead us and guide us, protect us, and to keep us. So much for the angels at this time, but let us realize that Satan has an army of his angels that are warring against the angels of God, trying to hinder the work of God. And the scarlet-colored beast symbolizes a mighty angel, one of the most ferocious, one of the most evil, one of the most terrible, angels of Satan that the world has ever known. And he is the one that ruled or was in charge of the Grecian Empire many years ago. But since that time he has been bound into the abyss, and he will be loosed again at that last day, and he will so dominate the Antichrist and the people of this world, the Antichrist kingdom. And it's no wonder that John marveled when he saw the works and the miracles and things that they done in that day. And so the Bible tells us that there are many scriptures. I won't name all of them, but we can look in Isaiah, Ezekiel, Joel, Zechariah, Luke, John, and Corinthians, the Ephesians, Thessalonians, and there are many others that talks about the evil powers of Satan. And the Bible tells us that there will be wickedness in high places in this last day. And I believe that we are living in the last day. This is the last day. And as I've explained before, that Satan is the ruler or the prince of the air and the ruler of this world, because this world or this earth has not been delivered up back into the hands of God as of yet, but it will be when Jesus returns to this earth again. But until that day, Satan is still going to be the prince of the air. He is still going to be the author of confusion. He is still going to be the accuser of the brethren. He is still going to bring famine and death and sickness and pestilence and all of the evil things on this earth until he is taken out of this world. And so let us just realize now that Satan is at work. He doesn't sleep. He works 24 hours a day, and he's doing all that he can. And I believe that he knows that his days are numbered here on this earth, and he's working even harder today You say, Brother Jerry, how do you know he's working harder today? Because we can look around us and we can see the conditions of this world. We can see the hearts of the people have turned away from God. I believe that we have entered into that time and have been there for some time, where the Bible tells us, except there be a falling away first, and I believe this is a literal falling away of the church, people turning away from God. If you don't believe this, just go out and talk with people and see how many that you can convince to come to church Sunday morning. It is harder now than it was 10 years ago, and it was harder 10 years ago than it was 20 years ago. I can remember, and some of you can remember, that you could announce a revival, and all you'd have to do is just play on your guitar, sing a few songs, and just pass the word around a little bit, and the church building would fill up. People would come to church, and we'd have revival. But today there are people that have other interests. They're not interested in church. They have other things that they'd rather do than to come to the house of the Lord. And there are many people today say, well, I can hear all of the preaching that I want to hear on television. And that is true. You can hear preaching 24 hours a day if you want to on somewhere on television. But did you know the Bible doesn't tell us that television can be our church? The Bible tells us to forsake not the assembling of yourselves together, as the manner of some are even this day. Almost 2,000 years ago, there were some who were not coming to church, and he said, even as the manner of some are even today. People say, well, I can go to church. No, you can't. The Bible tells me that when you come to church, let every one of you have something to contribute to the service. He said, whether it be a psalm, a hymn, whether it be a prophecy, or something, he said, let everyone contribute something to the church service. You cannot sit at home, watch television, listen to the preaching, and participate in the church service. Now, this is good meddling, but I hope it strikes home somewhere. But you cannot take part in the church services that you see on television, but you hear some good preaching, but you still need to attend church with the body of believers in which you believe like. Now, used to, we just said everybody's okay, just go to the church of your choice, but I've had to change my mind along those lines lately. I say that don't go just to any church, because there are a lot of churches that are not teaching the truth. And so we need to go to a church that believes the entire Bible, that believes that Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary, and that he died on the cross, shed his blood, that he rose again the third day, as he promised he would, that he ascended into the heavens and is now sitting at the right hand of the Father, making intercession for you and I, and that he did send back the Comforter, which is the Holy Spirit, that he promised, and he does indwell believers, and we can be filled with the Holy Spirit, and we can speak with other tongues as the Spirit gives utterance. We can believe the 9 spiritual gifts that the Bible gives us in Corinthians. We can believe that God is our healer, and that he is our deliverer, and that he will be with us every day. So we need to check the doctrinal views of a church before we can feel comfortable in worshiping with a certain church. Now, I'm going to be teaching more about that in the future, I believe, because I am becoming more convinced that there are many false doctrines being taught in this world today, and it's no wonder that Jesus said that there will be few that enter in. Now, I've gotten away from this lesson tonight, but it's good preaching anyway. But the Bible tells us here in verse 7 that this beast is referred to as the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit, as I've referred to, that we studied in lesson 12, which you can look back to page 38.15, and it tells us that he will so dominate or feel the Antichrist and come into him and possess him. And so this beast could not refer to the Antichrist or Satan, for neither of them have been confined to the bottomless pit, and therefore they cannot be loosed from it or ascend from it. And so we'll see later in this lesson that the 7 heads on the beast represent 7 kingdoms that have oppressed or will oppress Israel in the times of the Gentiles and prior to the kingdom of the Antichrist. So the 5th of these kingdoms, there were 7, and we can just look just a little bit. There were actually 7 kingdoms. The 7 heads on this scarlet-covered beast represent 7 kingdoms that have oppressed Israel in times past, or will have oppressed Israel before the Antichrist sets up his kingdom. The first of these was Egypt. Egypt was the first kingdom to oppress Israel in the time of the Gentiles. And as we have studied this before, as I said, we're more or less recapping some of the lessons that we studied before. And the second kingdom to oppress Israel was Assyria. And it was under Nineveh, under the reign of Nineveh. And it was also under the Assyrian reign that Nimrod set up his false doctrines, his false teaching, and this teaching has dominated the 7 heads or the 7 kingdoms up even today in this world. This spirit is manifest, for the Bible tells us that the spirit of Antichrist is present even today. It was in Paul's time. It has been throughout the last 2,000 years. It is today. The spirit of Antichrist is present, but the Antichrist, the person who will be Antichrist, will not be revealed until the church is taken out of the way. And so Egypt was number 1. Assyria was the second. These are the 7 heads that he talks about. The third one is Babylon, and all of these have oppressed Israel, and they have tried to do away with the children of Israel, or the Jewish people, and they have oppressed them severely. Of course, we've studied that about Babylon being the third empire to oppress Israel in the time of the Gentiles, and then after Babylon is the Medo-Persian. And so Medo-Persia was the 4th empire to oppress Israel in the times of the Gentiles. And then Greece was the 5th empire to oppress Israel in the times of the Gentiles. And the third one in Daniel, it's symbolic. In Daniel, it's symbolized by the belly and thighs of brass. It is symbolized as the leopard. It is symbolized as the he-goat. And this spirit out of the abyss that we're talking about, the prince of Grecia, or the prince of Greece, is this demonic spirit, this great demon power that it actually oppressed or possessed Alexander the Great. The world has wondered about Alexander the Great, how that he got his power, how that he could go forth conquering nations, and he almost conquered the entire known world at that time. And so this is why Daniel refers to this in the 10th chapter of Daniel as the prince of Greece, which will come. And so Greece is the 5th head of this beast, and the 6th head is the Roman Empire. Now, I'm going to stop right there for a moment and let us look here. For in the 8th verse, he said, "The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is." Now the beast, let's look back to verse 7. He said, "I will tell thee the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carried her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. And so the 7 heads that we were talking about, the 7 heads, the first one is Egypt, the second one is Assyria, the third one Babylon, the fourth one Medo-Persia, the fifth one Greece, and the sixth one Rome. He said that had 7 heads, and then he goes on to talk about this in the 8th verse, where he said the beast that thou sawest was and is not. And he talks about the 7 kings. We'll go on and read a couple of more verses. Number 9 said, and here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and one is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. So he said 5 are fallen. And so the first 5 kingdoms that oppressed Israel, which is Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece, when John wrote the book of Revelation, these kingdoms had already passed away. These were kingdoms that were, but they were not in John's day. And he said one is, and the one that he's talking about, the one that is the Roman Empire, the old Roman Empire, which was in existence during the time that John wrote the book of Revelation. And then he said the 7th one is yet to come. The 7th has not come yet, and the 7th one will be the revised, or the revived. This is not revised. I get these two words mixed up. But the 7th will be the revived Grecian Empire, and or the 7th will be revised Rome. Let me back up here and rephrase this. The 7th will be the revised Rome, where he talks about the 7 heads and the 10 horns. And as I've said before, the 10 horns represent powers or kingdoms. And so the 10 horns that we talk about here are the 10 kingdoms that will come to power after the church is taken out of this world. After the rapture, there will be 10 kings come into power, 10 kingdoms, which will be the revised Roman Empire that will be near the vicinity of the old Roman Empire. And so the 7th kingdom, but as we read a little bit farther here, he said there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, one is, and the other is not yet come. And so the 5 kings are the kingdoms that oppressed Israel up until the Roman Empire. And then John said this is the one that is. And then he said the other is not yet come, talking about the revised Roman Empire. And in the 11th verse then, he said, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. Now let me explain this if I can. We talked about the 7 kingdoms that have or will have oppressed Israel, which will be Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and revised Rome. And these are the 7. And then he said the 8th kingdom, or the 8th head, will rise up after this. And he said the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition, talking about the rise of the Antichrist and the beast out of the abyss that will completely possess him and dominate him. And then it says that he is the 8th and is of the 7. If you remember, we talked about the 10 horns, and we talked about the horn that was broken off, and then we talked, which was Greece, and then we talked about the little horn that grew up among the other horns. And if you remember studying this, the little horn represented the rise of the Antichrist kingdom, which will come up out of the Assyrian part of the Grecian Empire. And so the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth and of the seven, and goeth into perdition. What he's talking about going into perdition is at the end of the tribulation period, when Christ returns, that Christ will kill the Antichrist, and he will kill the false prophet, and he will cast them into the lake of fire, which means that he will go into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet. Remember, this was almost 2,000 years ago when this was written. And John said, the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but received power as kings 1 hour with the beast. And these have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. And so I've explained the 7 heads, and the 10 horns. The 7 heads represented the same as those of the dragon in chapter 12 and of the Antichrist in chapter 13. The heads represent the 7 world empires or powers which oppress Israel in the time of the Gentiles. And the time of the Gentiles will not end until Jesus returns to this earth again. And there are teachings that the times of the Gentiles will be when the church is taken out, but I don't believe that's really what the Bible's talking about, because the Gentiles will still be here on this earth, and Jerusalem will be trodden down of the Gentiles during the tribulation period. And so the time of the Gentiles will end when Jesus returns to this earth in person. And so we talk about the 7 kingdoms, and he said the 7 heads are 7 mountains, and it literally means 7 mountain kingdoms. There are some that have taught that the 7 mountain kingdoms represents Rome, and because the city of Rome is built upon 7 hills. This is contrary to the Bible, because the Bible says that 5 are fallen. And so it couldn't be 7 literal mountains, because 5 of those have not fallen. And he says 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. And so this disproves that theory. But it is 7 mountain kingdoms, or 7 powers which have reigned during the times of the Gentiles. And the proper order of these powers are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, revised Rome, and all of these kingdoms are mountain kingdoms. And the great whore, or the harlot religious system that we studied last week, has dominated them and has ruled them. And maybe they didn't know it, but they were ruled by this evil influence. And so that's why he's talking about this harlot sitting on the beast. The harlot is not part of the beast, but she is simply sitting on this beast, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. And so the 10 horns here are the same as in lesson 14 and 17. They represent 10 separate kingdoms of the 7th head, or revised Roman Empire. And the Antichrist will conquer 3 of these kingdoms, and the rest will give their power to him, making him Antichrist. For he said, the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, they shall hate the whore. In other words, they will say that I am tired of being oppressed by this religious system, and so they come together, join forces, give their power to the Antichrist, and these 10 kings, along with the Antichrist and the false prophet, will destroy or do away with this religious system, and then they will set up the Antichrist system, and the Antichrist will sit on the throne of David in the temple in Jerusalem and declare himself to be God. He will give all of his power to the false prophet, and the false prophet will be his priest or his prophet, and he will build an image of the Antichrist, and he will command the worlds of the peoples of this world, of this earth, to worship the Antichrist. And during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, we talk about the souls under the altar. We talk about the great multitude which no man can number. And these people are going to be martyred during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. But I don't believe that it's only the first 3.5 years. I believe that this religious system will come into existence even before the tribulation period begins. I believe the last day will become so bad and so perverted that peoples of this world will accept this false religion, and those that refuse to worship and become a part of this false religion will be martyred. They will be killed because they will not take part in the religious ceremonies. And as we studied last week, that this false religion, they will be made up of witchcraft. It will be made up of Satanism. It will be made up of sexual perversion. And it will be made up of everything ungodly. And this will be a religious system, but it will be totally anti-God. And those who still believe in God and believe in Jesus Christ and who want to be saved and live with Christ forever will be killed and become martyrs. The Bible speaks about those who John saw under the altar. And he said, "Who are these?" And the angel spoke and said, "You know who they are." He said, "These are those who have come out of great tribulation." So there will be martyrs during the entire tribulation period. The first 3.5 years will be caused by the great harlot or the religious system. The last 3.5 years of the tribulation will be caused by the Antichrist, the false prophet, and the 10 kings, and this perverted, this religious system who are pointing to the Antichrist and worshiping him. And the Antichrist will declare that he is God, and he will deceive the people of this earth, and many of them, many multitudes, millions, billions, number probably that no man can count, will be deceived, and they will accept him as God. It's hard to imagine this. It's hard to try to explain this. But they will be so deceived that they believe that he is actually God and has set up his kingdom, and therefore they will take part in his ceremonies, his rituals, his form of worship, and they will persecute and kill those who refuse to take the mark of the beast and become a part of that system. And so the 10 horns represent the revised Roman Empire. The Antichrist will conquer 3 of these kingdoms, and the rest of them will just simply give their power to him, and then they will set up their form of worship. So we've dealt with this in previous lessons, and so we don't really need to get into a lengthy discussion about the things that it explains in the middle of the tribulation. The 10 kings of revised Rome will get tired of the organized, oppressive religion and of the great whore, and their worship, they'll turn their worship from the harlot church or the harlot religious system without knowing this, and will actually turn to something much worse than what they've had before. And so these 10 wicked kings, or these 10 wicked kingdoms, will fulfill God's plan without really knowing this. The Bible tells us here very plainly that that they fulfill God's plan, for it tells us that for God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God be fulfilled. Now I want you to notice this. It said, for God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will. These wicked kings will not know it, but actually they're doing the will of God, for it says that God has placed this in their hearts to fulfill his will. In other words, God will be so displeased with the religion, the false religion, the great whore, the harlot, or the false religious system that dominates the world in the last day, much like it was in the times of Noah. But God put a rainbow in the sky and promised that he would not destroy the world by water again. And so he is using the wicked kings without them knowing this to destroy the false religion and to fulfill God's will on earth. And so it said that he will put it in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree, and it's God's will for them to agree together and to give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of God be fulfilled. And he said, the woman which thou sawest in that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So he was talking about Mystery Babylon, the woman which thou sawest. And he calls it that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth.